The year is 1969, the year of the moon landing, Woodstock, and the Stonewall riots. Most importantly for our story, the U.S. is still reckoning with the impacts of the civil rights movement, and while the rights of Black and other marginalized communities have become enshrined in law, deep inequities continue to persist on the ground. Hattie Carthan knows this firsthand. She has spent much of the 60s organizing her Brooklyn neighborhood to improve and strengthen their community. In particular, she has focused on trees. When she moved into her apartment in a brownstone on Vernon Avenue in 1953, the street was lined with leafy trees. A decade later, all but 3 of the trees had been removed, and the neighborhood had become, in Hattie's own words, the middle of a slum and a ghetto. Despite substantial resistance, Hattie eventually got support for the planting of 1,500 ginkgo, sycamore, and honey locust trees, which transformed the neighborhood. But by the end of the 1960s, she became aware of a looming threat to the area's most iconic tree, the Lafayette Avenue Southern Magnolia. What she did next would define her legacy. You're listening to Plant Connection. Life today can feel overwhelming, like we've drifted away from its natural rhythm. This podcast is your space to slow down, breathe, and rediscover the peace and clarity that come from reconnecting with the natural world. I'm your host, Lisa Cutshaw. Let's reconnect, one plant at a time. Magnolias are simply spectacular. They can reach heights of up to 90 feet, and the fragrant flowers can reach the diameter of a dinner plate. It's no surprise they are a firm favorite ornamental tree across the world, and to trace their history, we're going to begin at the very beginning. Magnolias are among the first flowering trees to have evolved, appearing 100 million years ago in the mid-Cretaceous period, when dinosaurs still roamed the Earth. We think of flowers as a fundamental part of life on Earth, but they're really pretty new additions, far more recent than sharks, crocodiles, or even the earliest mammals. So what came first, the flower or the pollinator? Magnolias even predate bees. The theory goes that they evolved to be pollinated by wingless, nittilid beetles, which mostly ate decaying vegetation before flowers were a thing. These beetles have very limited color vision, but they do have a good sense of smell. This probably explains why most magnolia flowers are white rather than brighter colors, and why they emit such a strong perfume. Magnolias have a lot of pollen and not much nectar, reflecting beetles' dietary preferences. And their flowers are exceptionally robust. Beetles have strong jaws and might be partial to having a munch on the flowers as they seek out the pollen, so best to have sturdy petals that can withstand a little nibble. These days, bees and butterflies join beetles in the suite of pollinators that magnolia flowers attract. If pollinated, the flowers go on to produce alien-looking pods containing red berry-like seeds. Many animals, including possums, squirrels, turkey, and quail, are partial to the seeds and help distribute them far and wide. And these seeds can last a very, very long time. A few decades ago, archaeologists found a magnolia seed in a Bronze Age food storage pit in Japan. Bronze Age, which they estimated to be around 2,000 years old. They planted it, and lo and behold, it grew. Intriguingly, the flowers it produced had 7 petals, rather than the normal 6 of its modern descendant. While we're on the subject, it's a little misleading to call them petals for magnolia trees. Magnolias do not have true petals, nor sepals, which are the little green leafy bits found at the base of most flowers. Rather, they have tepals, 2 layers of indistinguishable petal-like structures. This is another throwback to their ancient roots, making flowers before the flower blueprint had been fully signed off. Magnolia's evolutionary head start granted them a wide distribution across what is now Europe, North America, and Asia. In modern times, they're found naturally only in the southern U.S. and southern China. There are some interesting differences between American and Asian magnolias. American species tend to produce leaves in the spring and flowers in the summer, while Asian species do the reverse. This is likely because the American climate is much more susceptible to late frosts, which would easily damage early flowers. Magnolias have been valued by people since time immemorial. The Choctaw people, who originally lived in what is now Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, used magnolia bark tonics to treat skin and kidney diseases. It's also said that the seeds have medicinal benefits, helping prevent heart diseases, epilepsy, and high blood pressure. In modern times, scientific studies suggest derivatives from magnolia sap may be useful in treating cancer. Another study found a link between compounds in the bark and treating the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. The first magnolias made it to Europe in the 1600s, brought from Louisiana by the French botanist Pierre Magnolia, from whose surname the name Magnolia is derived. Carl Linnaeus, the father of species taxonomy, chose the name to honor his contemporary some years after his death. The Lafayette Avenue tree that we began with is a southern magnolia, Magnolia grandiflora, whose native range extends from across the southeastern United States. Southern magnolias have long been closely entwined with culture in their native range, the southeastern U.S. For instance, in Gullah folklore, magnolia's white blooms are said to be the spirits of the dead. The tree also has a somewhat controversial link with the Confederacy, having been adopted by the Confederate Army as a symbol of Southern values. The very short-lived Sovereign Republic of Mississippi featured a magnolia flower on its flag, an icon that has made a reappearance in recent years, when Mississippi chose the new magnolia flag as its new state flag in 2021. One particular southern magnolia has also brushed shoulders with many generations of U.S. presidents. Andrew Jackson took a seedling from his Tennessee plantation and planted it near the White House's south portico in the early 1800s, in memory of his wife Rachel. It went on to survive for nearly 200 years, even featuring on the back of the $20 bill for many decades. But in 2018 it was decided that the tree was becoming too fragile, and it was cut down. Cuttings were taken and have been planted in various places, including one in the site of the original tree. The oldest known southern magnolia has its own interesting tale concerning a fight over the tree's rightful namesake. The Jones magnolia is found in Washington State Park in Arkansas, said to have been planted by 1839 just down the road from where Jim Bowie first fashioned the now famous Bowie knife. The same year, two local families, both surnamed Jones, had baby boys. One grew up to be governor of Arkansas, and the other a U.S. senator. The tree was named after one of the boys, but which one is lost to time, and both claim it for themselves. Eventually, the senator bought the land where the magnolia stood and made his home there, which apparently settled the debate. So now, at last, we come back to the southern magnolia that caught the attention of Hattie Carthan in 1969, who first noticed the tree on her daily bus commute. It's unusual for this species to grow and thrive as far north as Brooklyn. The tree first arrived in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood in 1885 as a young sapling, fresh off a ship from North Carolina, in the hands of local resident William Lemkin. By 1969, the tree had grown to a height of 40 feet and was still doing well, but it faced a grave threat. The tree was abutted by 4 brownstone buildings that were scheduled for demolition to make way for apartments and a parking lot. It was a familiar story. Hattie had already fought long and hard to regreen her neighborhood. Bedford-Stuyvesant, known locally as Bed-Stuy, had suffered deeply from decades of neglect, disinvestment, and disinterest from local municipalities, related to its inhabitants mostly being poor and from minority groups. So over time, the once abundant street trees were removed and died off, just one symptom of systemic discrimination. Trees are one of those things that increase our well-being in ways that are difficult to quantify, which may be why they are so often undervalued. The lack of trees in Bed-Stuy had profound effects on the area's inhabitants, from practical impacts like no shade during the scorching summers, through to more intangible impacts like a sense of peace and connection with nature. Hattie knew in her heart that Bed-Stuy would be a better place with more trees. To try and reverse her neighborhood's fortunes, she reached out to fellow residents to raise the funds for tree replacements. Initial uptake was tepid, to say the least, and a fundraising barbecue in 1965 made a very modest $200. Many didn't share Hattie's convictions about the importance of trees. Some called her a tree nut and tree idiot for her efforts. But for the next barbecue, Hattie invited New York City Mayor John Lindsay and managed to get the city on side. The mayor budgeted $1.2 million for tree planting and maintenance in 1967, and the ever-growing Bedford-Stuyvesant Beautification Association, led by Hattie, used a portion of these funds to plant hundreds of trees across the neighborhood. So there was lots of momentum by the time Hattie began to take notice of the spectacular magnolia she could see from the bus window. When she learned about its impending destruction, she sprang into action. With some canny coordination, she sought the favor of the City Planning Commission, and with other influential groups to build a protective wall to shield the tree from the demolition. The wall was approved, but Hattie suspected this was only a short-term fix. To secure the tree's future, she persuaded the City of New York to designate the tree as an official city living landmark. This made it essentially untouchable. Hattie still was not satisfied. Just saving the tree was not enough, she says. What about those buildings? The brownstones were also steeped in history and deeply tied to the neighborhood's cultural roots. One of the 4 brownstones had already been demolished to build the parking lot. The other 3 still stood, for the time being. Hattie went to the city and offered to buy them. The city said she could have them for $25,000, far out of her budget. But Hattie was an exceptional negotiator, and somehow eventually persuaded the city to part with the buildings for just $1,200. Wasting no time, Hattie and her community renovated the buildings into the Magnolia Tree Earth Center, a conservation institution complete with experimental rooftop gardens, greenhouses, and conservation and tree planting classes for local young people. The magnolia tree out front continues to thrive to this day and retains the title of the only living landmark in the city, and the Magnolia Tree Earth Center also persists, though threatened by funding troubles. If you've been inspired by Hattie's story, perhaps you could look them up and send a donation their way. And if you've been inspired to grow your own southern magnolia tree, you are most likely to have success if you live within its native range, though it has been successfully reared in much cooler climes, as the tree in Brooklyn proves. It's also grown ornamentally in much of Europe and Asia, too. Normally you'll find magnolias sold as propagated saplings, because seedlings, that is, trees grown from seed, can take a decade or more to flower, and are more unpredictable in their characteristics. Southern magnolias grow well in both sun or shade, and prefer moist, well-drained, acidic soils. It's pretty tolerant of moisture variability, and can deal with urban and coastal environments. The leaves are heavy and have a waxy coating, which makes them resistant to both air pollution and salt spray. It's important to remember that magnolias are quite a messy tree. At different times in the year, they shed leaves, petals, and seed pods, which means you may have to spend a bit of time cleaning up after them. This is less of an issue if the tree is planted among other plants that can use these offerings as valuable sources of nutrients. And there's another thing you can do with magnolia petals too. Eat them. They can be fried, pickled, steeped as a tea, or air-dried to make a flavorsome spice. I should probably add that the thing that makes southern magnolia leaves difficult to clean up is their size. They can be quite large, bigger than an adult human's head. I love to think that something that first evolved to attract a diminutive little beetle has now made it into our hearts as a beloved and versatile tree that can brighten any garden or neighborhood, or even bring a community together. Thank you for joining me on this journey back to nature with Plant Connection. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to tap subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss the next episode. See you next time.